Great Star by Mad Painter, aka T.R. Becker. The colonel threw the file down on the tabletop in front of him. Don't give me any of that scientific mumbo-jumbo. Just tell me why I should give you $2.5 billion. What's in it for our country? He looked as if he could rip someone's head off and not think twice about it, thought Dr. Susie Surefoot. She regretted having to come to the military for funding. For the last 2 years, I have jumped through every hoop that your board of scientists and researchers have put in my way just to come to what's in it for my country? How about free, cheap, unlimited energy just to start with? She was getting angry. You'd know that if you had read the file. She pointed at it. Who do you think they reported to? She thought she'd seen a slight smile on his face. Either way you look at it, in the end the president gave me control of the bank account. From what I'm told by my team, that in the interest of national security, I should give you walking papers and deny any involvement with you. He paused, looked at her to see her reactions. She never blinked, so he continued. Both the president and I believe that you can do what you say. This made her smile. She thought it would have taken at least 2 more years to get any kind of approval. There's one thing you must do first, Doctor. What would that be? She asked. Well, you must die. 2 weeks after the meeting, Susie was, as far as the world was concerned, a victim of a car accident. She did feel bad that there were a few people that would be hurt, and she would miss them too. But what her work could mean to the human race, it was worth it, she thought. She was waiting in a hangar to board a naval airplane, to go to a place that she had no idea where it was. The colonel had told her that the less she knew about where she was going, the better it was. He told her to pack as if she was going to the beach. She didn't like all the secrecy and didn't think that her life was in any kind of danger. She had given the colonel a list of personnel that she had thought would be needed, and he told her not to worry, that she would have the world's best to work with. This didn't make her feel any better. She had never trusted the military, but they were the only way to get the funding she needed. A corporal came up to her and told her it was time to board and to follow him. For the next 18 hours she had changed planes 4 times, and each time had no idea where she was. At the last stop she was told she was to spend the night there, and her last flight would depart at 0900 the next day. She was taken to her room and told that someone would come to get her for dinner at 1800 and please be ready. The first thing she done was take a shower. There was no television and her phone no longer was connected. She was still feeling as if she was on a plane, so she decided to lay down. Right at 1800, a young man knocked on the door and said he was to take her to dinner. As they walked down a long hall, she could see nothing that told her where she was. She could have been anywhere in the world. They reached the door that the young man tapped on, then opened it so she could enter. When she did, he closed it behind her. There was a dining room table with an old man with white hair and a dress uniform who stood up. Doctor, please join me, won't you? He smiled. He motioned to her to take the other chair at the table. Dinner will be soon. Care for a drink while we wait? She said sure as she sat down, and then asked, You know who I am, but I am at a loss as to who you are. Oh, pardon me. I'm Admiral Benjamin Trident, but from now on call me Ben or BT. He smiled as he poured them each a glass of red wine. I hope that we will become friends. I'm really interested in your theory of solonumulescence. He sat back down. It's not my theory. I learned about it first from the work done by Professor Putterman. she corrected him. "And to tell the truth, I'm not sure it first come from him." There was a bell sound, and a couple of stewards walked in with trays of food. They set them in front of each of them and then went back out. "I thought we could use this one last good meal before where we are headed," he said. "You mean you're going with me?" she asked. He smiled and said yes. "I'll be heading up the military side of the project, and we'll be getting whatever you need to make this work. I hope that won't be a problem for you." "Of course not." She removed the cover to her dinner and was surprised to find her favorite meal: beef and celery gravy, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The Admiral knew more about her than she liked. "Am I to understand that the military will do the building for me then?" she asked as she began to eat. "Most of the building is already done." She thought he said it with pride. "I should say that I believe that you will be well pleased with what is waiting for you." "Waiting for me? I thought I was to receive funding to use as I see fit." She stopped eating with a forkful in midair. "Am I not receiving the funding?" He looked her in the eye and said, "Not in the way you think." He paused, smiled from ear to ear, then added, "The $2.5 billion will be your fee for our overseeing the project." She was shocked. Her mouth dropped open, and the piece of meat on her fork fell into her plate. Her hand was shaking so bad she had to put down the fork. "Believe me, the project needs you. Everything we have done has been based on your work, and the President and the Joint Chiefs believe that you are the only one to make this a success." Later that night, she sat on the edge of her bed in her room, wondering just what she had gotten herself into. They had talked her into faking her death, and now saying they were going to give her an insane amount of money. They had her God only knows where, and no one would ever be looking for her. This was getting a little surreal for her. She was not sure if she should trust anyone at this point. She felt that the Admiral may be one that could be trusted, but he was still military and had to answer to the President and the Joint Chiefs. He told her that she would need to come up with a new name to go by before they reached their destination tomorrow. She had a few ideas, but what good could it do? She may just be on a one-way trip into a type of exile. Sleep for her didn't come easy that night. She tossed and turned all night. When the steward knocked on her door to tell her 30 minutes to departure, she was all ready. When she reached the hangar, the Admiral was already there waiting on her. "I hope you slept well, Doctor. One more ride and we will reach Bright Star. That is what we have named the project, by the way. I must say, I'd be happy to reach it, but is there any way that we can at least get a cup of coffee first?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I should have told you last night. We will be having breakfast on board the ship." Ship, she thought. 18 hours of flying. Now she had to board a ship. She sure hoped this was worth it. 2 hours later, she stood on a deck just outside of her cabin watching the water flow by. The ship was not a naval vessel. It was some kind of cargo ship. The Admiral told her that they would reach Bright Star mid-afternoon, and she should just relax until then. There was no way she was going to relax. She had spent the last 20 years working on the Soma Lunalensis, and the last 5 trying to get funding to build a large prototype working model. Her last hope was the military, and now she was regretting her decision. The Admiral walked up, but he was no longer in his uniform. Instead, he was dressed in a white lab coat and khaki pants. "Doctor, there's a few papers I will need you to sign." He held up a file. "They have to be in your new name. I hope you have come up with one." "Yes, I have, Admiral." Please, no more Admiral. From now on, it's Ben or Doctor. Most workers on the project have no clue that I am with the military. She thought that strange. After all, this was being funded by the military. They are setting up a table on the aft deck for lunch. We will be joined by a couple others, so I'll need to know how to introduce you. I have settled on the name Laura Lilith, she said. Okay then, Laura. I'll see you on the aft deck in a few minutes. He headed towards the back of the ship. As she watched him walk away, she thought he was a man who knew what he wanted. During lunch, she met Professor Alex Tudor, a psychologist that was going to see to the mental health of the team. He was elderly and reeked of Freudism, she thought. The second was a physicist named Cheryl Kelly, that for some reason looked familiar to her. She wondered if they too were using aliases like she was. The whole lunch felt as if Tudor was only there to observe them. From what I understand, Laura, that project is all based on your work, but I must tell you, I know little of this somnolescence. It's all based on Putterman's star in a jar, right? Asked Cheryl. Yes, I believe that going about it in the right way, we can limit the need for all oil or nuclear power. And you think you know the right way? Tudor asked. No, I know what the math says, and that is what I believe. Don't try that psychobabble on me if you want to be part of this team. I won't have my every decision questioned by someone that has no clue about physics. We will reach Bright Star in about 3 hours, and when we do, each of you will be busy, so it would be a good idea to relax while you have a chance, Ben said as he stood up. Laura knew he was just being diplomatic, but didn't blame him, and really she had not given Tudor a chance. She just had a feeling that he was going to be more trouble than he would be of help. When the ship docked, she was surprised at how small the village was. There was no more than 15 buildings and maybe a dozen fishing boats. As they were loaded into a jeep, she seen that there was no signs anywhere to say where they were, nor were there any people out. She wondered if this was on purpose or if the people who lived there cared not to have tourists invading their home. The only thing she did know was they were on a volcanic island. They only rode for a few minutes when they reached the tunnel, with guards that waved them through when they seen Ben. 5 minutes later, they were in a huge parking lot. But there was only a couple of cars there parked. They were taken to a room where they had ID cards made. To Laura's surprise, they were told that they were to spend the night there and would be taken to the Bright Star complex in the morning. She had thought they were there. Cheryl and her were taken to a room to share and told that dinner would be brought to them. The room had 2 beds, a couch, a chair, and a television with a nice collection of DVDs. Cheryl sat down on one of the beds and said, "Wow, I'm not sure about you, but I'm getting the feeling that they're slowing our arrival on purpose." "I do believe you are right." She sat down on the couch. What is to be your part in this project?" "They didn't tell you? I'm to be your assistant, and I'm in charge of fluid dynamics." "Fluid dynamics?" Laura questioned. "From what I've been told was that you were going to use a neutral fluid that I came up with a few years back." She had a smile that showed she was proud of this fact. She explained that the fluid was a type of water that did nothing to anything. You could put your hand into it, and when you removed it, it was as dry as it was when it went in. It would not conduct electricity as normal water when under a magnetic field, and it only weighed half as much. It sounded good to Laurel, but she needed to have more information on this neutral fluid. It seemed to her that the military had already mapped out the way the project was going to run, and she didn't like that one bit. She was having second thoughts about agreeing to head up the project. She was promised full control, but it was beginning to look like she was going to be controlled. They spent the rest of the evening talking about what Ben had promised each of them about Bright Star. When Laurel woke up at 0700, Cheryl was already in the shower, so she sat there thinking all that had happened in the last 2 weeks. She really liked Ben, but was still not sure if she could trust him. Why was the military willing to fund the project? Could there be more to it than just clean energy? There was far too many questions about all this that she needed answers for. She felt a little better after she had her turn in the shower. A steward brought them breakfast and told them to be ready at 0900. The ladies were ready when the knock came. Laura opened the door to Ben standing there smiling. "I hope you have rested well. It's going to be a long day for you ladies." Laura stared him in the eyes and said, "For you too, if you expect my cooperation." "That goes for me too," Cheryl added. "Don't worry, ladies. Before the day is over, you will have far more questions and concerns than you do now. Believe me." He made a small laugh. "Trust me, it'll be worth it." Laura felt as if he was being sincere, but she didn't want to have more questions. She wanted answers. "Look, one thing I need to know right now. Are you weaponizing my research?" "Oh no, this is about cheap energy, I promise. Just follow me," he said as he turned and headed down the hall. Laura looked at Cheryl, who shrugged her shoulders, so they followed him. He led them down a hall, around a few turns until they came to a red door elevator. Once they entered, he told them how to press their ID cards over the blank panel where the numbers would have been on a normal elevator. He explained that only those with top security clearance could use the elevator, and that few entered the complex this way. This made Laurel wonder what way did they then. He told them that they were going down just a little over 2 miles deep with a smile on his face. When the door opened, they were greeted by 2 armed guards who checked their ID cards before letting them pass. He led them down a hallway with doors on each side, each having names on them. She guessed they were offices. She knew none of the names, but that was no surprise. After all, she had a new name herself, and so did Cheryl. As they rounded a corner of the hallway, both women stopped dead in their tracks, and Laurel uttered a "wow." Ben kind of giggled at the reaction. The hall opened into a natural cavern that was at least as big as 3 football fields. They stood on a ring floor that ran all the way around the cavern. A third of it was water, with 2 submarines docked and a slip for 3 more. There was even a small beach, and there were people all over the place, military and civilian. "So what do you think of our little tropical getaway?" Ben asked. The ladies were speechless. "Well, here comes our ride." They looked, and a golf cart pulled up and stopped. There was no driver. As they got on, Ben said Research Center, and off they went. There were a few restaurants and stores set into the cavern wall, a theater, a bar, and a gym. It looked to be a well-run small city. There were even plants and a few trees here and there. One would think a military base would have been more dull, she thought to herself. The cart came to a stop in front of a hallway where over the top was a sign that read Research Center. "Okay, first I'm going to show you to your office, and then I'll show you the lab," Ben told them as they got out. They followed him down the hallway all the way to the end where a door read Laurel Lilith. He showed them how to use their ID card to unlock the door. As they entered, Ben said, "This is your office, Cheryl." It was not huge, about 15 by 15 foot, with a desk in one corner and a couple chairs in front of it. It was simply a secretary's office, like any other office. "Where's the computer?" asked Cheryl. "The desk is interactive. When you sit down, you can call for the computer. It rises out of the desktop." He pointed at the two doors in the back wall. "That one is a bathroom. This is Laura's office." He opened the office door and went in. The ladies followed him. Laura's office was 2 times as big. There was not only a desk and chairs, but there was a couch and a small bar with a coffee maker on it. The whole back wall behind the desk was what looked like black glass. "This is all very impressive, but I want to see where we will be working," Laurel said. "Yes, of course you do. Please take a seat at your desk first. There's a few things I would like you to see." She sat down as asked. Okay, on the right of the edge is a button that starts the voice command, and say computer. She pushed the button and said the word computer. The screen rose up out of the desk and the keyboard showed as letters in the surface of the desk. There was a bell sound and a voice said, "Laurel Lilith, authorized user." She could not help but smile a little bit. "Now tell it to give you clear view." Ben smiled at her, pointing at the black wall behind her. Cheryl moved over to stand next to Ben. "Computer, give me clear view, please." She turned, looked at the blackness of the wall as it began to kind of shift and slowly become clear. Both of the women's mouths fell open in amazement. They were overlooking a huge room with many people at control panels on one side, and the other side of the room was taken up with a lot of equipment of all kinds, and right in the middle was a huge ball of liquid floating in midair. Cheryl's eyes widened, saying, "Is that how?" "Yes, it's your neutral fluid, and it's held in place by a magnetic field. Now, Laura, would you call that a little more impressive?" She could not believe her eyes. She was seeing a full-blown version of her mock-up power plant. She had built a little one 2 years ago, but they had improved upon it. She had never thought to get the liquid suspended in a magnetic field, let alone to use that much liquid. It was a good 30 feet across. She looked at Ben. "If you had gone this far by stealing our research, what do you need us for?" "My intention is not to steal anything, and you, after all, are being paid nicely. My intention was to save you a lot of headaches and to keep all this as secret as possible. As far as any others are concerned, your ideas died with you." She could understand this thinking, but she didn't have to like it. For the next 2 weeks, Laura took control of the project with Cheryl's help. Ben stayed out of the way as much as he could. He had done a great job of getting most of the equipment up and running, but not really knowing or having the understanding that she did, the systems needed a lot of tweaking. It explained why they needed her and willing to pay her so much. She was able to oversee most of the work from her office, which was fine with her. She didn't feel comfortable working with a group as big as that. There was still things that she was not sure of how to deal with, like what was going to be the temperature inside the bubble and outside. On her prototype, the temperature had reached near 10 million degrees. She was watching the reflection of the control panel lights on the fluid, so lost in her thought that when the intercom buzzer went off, she jumped. "Yes," she said. Cheryl's voice said, "Ben is here to see you." "Send him in, please, thank you." A moment later, Ben walked in smiling like he always did. "Hope you're having a good day," he said as he sat down. I'm having second thoughts about the temperature for one thing, and a few other things too. Temperature is no problem. The neutral fluid dissipates it fast. That was one of the reasons we went with it and not sterile water. Will it be enough to stop the radiation? As you know, this is why we went with the bubble as big as it is. Look, Laurel, you can come up with hundreds of reasons not to do this, but you're going to have to put your doubts to rest. She knew he was right. She was going to have to make the decisions to proceed. Over the next few days, she made the decisions that were needed, and it was on a Thursday at noon that they started. The first thing was to insert the quarter-inch bubble of gas at the center of the neutral liquid. She had decided on a mixture of lithium, potassium, and chloride. It took a little over an hour for the gas bubble to move to the center of the fluid, driven by the magnetic field. The arm that held the sound generator was moved into place under the neutral fluid, and all was ready to go. Laurel and Cheryl sat in her office watching the progress. From the intercom she heard Ben, who was down on the control floor. "Time to go dark." Laurel was nervous as she watched the lights go out in the lab one by one. Cheryl and her were already in the dark. At 13:59, the only light in the lab was the one in front of Ben. "All right, time to shine. 3, 2, 1. He turned the switch just as the clock hit 1400. Almost instantly, in the middle of the fluid, there was a blinding flash of purple light. No one was prepared for the intensity of the flash. The control computer sounded a failed alarm and shut down automatically. It took a whole 4 minutes before anyone could see again. "Anyone know what went wrong?" Laurel yelled into the intercom. She could see Ben shaking his head. "No clue, but I'm getting a slight radiation reading. Whatever happened is still having an effect on the neutral fluid." He pushed a few buttons, then stopped, looked up at Laurel. "Just to be safe, I believe we should evacuate the lab till this baby cools down. The temperature inside is beyond our ability to measure at the moment." "Have everyone meet in the conference room," she told him, for the next 4 hours to discuss what had gone wrong. No one could offer an explanation. Everything was perfect. There should be a pulsing orb of plasma dead center of the bubble of fluid. "Ben, could you please keep monitoring the lab and let me know when it's safe to try again?" "Sure, I'll take readings every few hours. Just so you know, the glass wall in your office is thick enough you are safe to be there." Then he added, "I'm sure we'll figure this out. Setbacks are to be expected when you work with so many different technologies." He smiled at her. After dinner, she decided to go to her office and work on what the problem was. She was sure that it must have been something she had overlooked, and she was going to find out what it was. She sat down at her desk and said "computer," and it rose up out of the desktop. "Show me the readings out of the Bright Star run today." The screen lit up with a couple of graphs. One was the temperature, and its analysis surprised her. At the point of activation had reached 30 million degrees and was still over 27 5 hours later. The radiation graph showed spikes that could be lethal if exposed to for long periods of time, but they didn't last long each time. She looked at the current levels and wondered just what was going on. None of the readings were the way they should have been. It was just not making any sense to her. "Give me clear view, please," she said. She turned around as the wall became clear. The lab was still dark, so the light from within her office shined across the surface of the neutral fluid. She was not sure how long she stared at the reflection of light, because she was lost in thought, when suddenly there was a slow ripple in the reflection. and then a moment later there was a small flash of light from the center area. She was shocked by what she thought she had seen. She turned to the computer and almost yelled, "Have Ben report here and tell him to bring a telescope if we can find one. Lower the lights by 70%, please." As she waited for Ben 2 more times, she thought she had seen a flash of light. But it was so fast and so small, she was not sure it was not just her imagination. She turned to the computer and asked, "Can you show me a picture of a 3-foot around the center in infrared?" A moment passed and the screen showed a multicolored image that for some reason she thought she had seen before. Ben walked in carrying a monticle telescope on a tripod. "Best I can do, this baby even has infrared. So, what's this about?" She pointed at the screen and asked, "Do you know what this is?" He looked at it and said, "Sure, that's a picture of the background radiation of the universe. What does that have to do with needing a telescope?" He held it up. Set it up on a desk and pointed at the center of the neutral fluid. He looked at her a little bewildered, but did as she asked. "Turn on the infrared mode." He looked through it for a moment. Then he seen a flash. He looked at her. What he seen was what was on the computer screen. She moved over and took a look herself, and then giggled. "What did I just see, and why are you giggling?" he asked her. She smiled and said, "Don't you understand that at 2 o'clock on a Thursday we gave birth to a whole new universe?"